Hi, so for my project, I made a PVC transverse flute. So what I did was I drilled a hole for the embouchure, which pretty much just means the mouthpiece hole where I blow air into it. And this hole is about 0.5 centimeters in radius. And then I left a gap between this mouthpiece hole and the first fingering, and I drilled about, I think, 20-ish holes from over here to down here. But then I covered the holes that I didn't need with tape because I realized that this section was enough to cover most of my holes. So in between these holes, the gap is around 1.5 centimeters and the hole is around 0.25 centimeters in radius. So yeah, that's how I made my flute. And I also put a cork over here because although the flute is an open instrument, which means that both sides are open, it is actually open through the sides opening is actually open through the mouthpiece, so the embouchure hole instead of here. So I put a cork stopper over here. And yeah, so how does the flute work? Essentially, the player blows this really fast passage of air over here. So I can demonstrate. So what happens when I do that is some of the air obviously goes off, deflects off of here, but some of it goes in. And when it goes in, it vibrates. It makes vibrations in the air inside the pipe. And that causes these vibrations to oscillate. And oscillating just means a repeated swing back and forth, and up and down, repeated motion. And this forms a standing wave that keeps on going and going and travels throughout the entire flute. So that's what happens when I blow into the flute. So, but how do we alter the notes? Essentially, if we want a lower note, we increase the distance between the mouth hole to whatever fingering hole we want. So for instance, a hole that's more down, like if I'm opening this hole, it'll give us a lower pitch which is also known as a lower frequency because it is farther away from the hole. And that's obviously lower than a note like this, where the distance is only this much. Yeah, so you can hear the different frequencies and the different pitch, and they make different notes. But how does this really work? So essentially, when I blow into the flute and the air column, which is basically the distance from the mouthpiece to whatever fingering I'm playing, is far, then that stretches out the standing wave, which makes it oscillate less frequently, and that produces a lower pitch. So this wavelength is actually calculated as 2L, so 2 times the length of here to whatever fingering hole I'm playing, according to the fundamental frequency formula for an open pipe, which, as previously explained, means that it's open on this end and also open on this end. So yeah, and if I want a higher note or a higher frequency, I would decrease the distance between here and here because I want the wave to contract, and I wanted to oscillate more frequently by giving it less space between. So yeah, how I tested this was I essentially increased the length from the mouthpiece to hole by opening everything. Closing everything except one hole, closing everything except one hole, closing everything except one hole, and leaving this hole open the whole time. So I would do I would test it like this, 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 and I measured it using Firefox, which is this software that can measure the frequency. And I left this hole open because I had to let the air be released from here, because if it wasn't, then all of these holes wouldn't work, because the end was too far from where the air was from where the air was traveling. So essentially the air is coming out from here, as well as here, but first of all coming out here, so the notes actually work. Yeah, so that's how I tested my flute. And the fundamental frequency formula actually also correlates to this relationship between the length of the air column, or the length from the embouchure hole to one of the fingering holes, because essentially as this length increases, there's an inverse relationship which is said in the fundamental frequency formula, and since the fundamental frequency formula says that frequency equals the speed of sound, which is v, which is 343 meters per second, is over 2l, so it's over the wavelength. So that obviously gives us an inverse relationship, which is supported by the relationship between the length and the frequency, as we just described. So finally, the takeaway is just that as the length increases, the note decreases, the frequency decreases. That corresponds to both the formula as well as my physics explanation of waves. So yeah, that's it. Thank you. This is Ode to Joy.